is the momentum of our very first webinar at this US Education Fair. And we are very excited, delighted, and very honored to have our first panelist speaker, distinguished person who is the Vice Consul of the United States Consulate in the country of Georgia. And without further ado, I'm here to introduce you to Matthew Priest, and this is to open our F1 student visa issues webinar. Thank you, Matt, for joining us today on Saturday. We're all ears to hear, what you have to say about how to obtain the visa, what to do with it in the US, and how in the COVID times visas are issues or not. Thank you very much. You've got about 20 minutes to talk, and then we will leave about 10 minutes for question and answer session.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here with all of you today. Hopefully you find this very informative. Hopefully I can answer most, if not all, of your questions. And then in the end, you will end up having a very good experience studying in the US, because that's our hope, and I know that that is all of your hope as well. So first of all, for myself, I just want to mention that this is a topic that I'm very passionate about, very interested in, because before I started working for the US Embassy, I worked at some universities in the US, and I worked with international students. I worked with advising students about visa issues, F1 visa issues. And so this was something I was doing even before working for the US Embassy. So I think that that will help me answer even more of your questions. And so with that, let's start talking about how do you study in the US? And the first thing is you need to apply and get accepted at a university or college in the US. That's the first step. Once you have admission to the school, they will register you in a system called SEVIS or SEVIS, and then that will allow you to receive a document known as an I-20. Once you have this document, you can make your appointment with the US Embassy or Consulate in your home country, and you'll make that appointment, schedule the interview, and you'll bring with you to that appointment or interview the I-20 document that the school issued to you. It's always a good idea to bring with you financial documents showing how you're going to be able to pay for your studies and your living expenses in the US. It's also good to bring with you your acceptance letter or admission letter for that school. And if you've traveled on a previous visa, it's important to note that or mention that, bring documents related to that. Those are the key documents. If you are married or you have kids and they also are planning to travel with you, you'll want to bring proof showing your relationship. So that would be like a marriage certificate or a birth certificate for any kids that you might have. So those are just some of the simple basic documents you'll need to bring with you for the visa interview. And if you're fortunate and you receive the visa at the interview, great. That's a good step. Then the next step is traveling to the US. You'll need to bring your passport with the visa and that I-20 document with you. And you cannot enter the US more than 30 days before the start of your program. So you'll have to plan ahead with that. And once you're in the US, you're going to work very closely with your school, your college, your university. They have advisors who are going to help guide you on all matters related to your visa status. And that's the kind of job that I used to have. And so they will tell you what you can, what you cannot do. And some of those things are, you there are restrictions on working, okay? Usually any work that you're going to do either needs to be on campus at the school, or it needs to be some sort of work experience that is related to your program of study, whatever you're studying. And that generally requires approval first. So you can't just go start working at McDonald's, okay? You've got to make sure you've got approval for that. The other thing is related to your studies. Your primary purpose when you have a student visa is to be a student, is to be studying. So you are expected to be a full-time student every semester, except usually in the summer, you aren't required, but every school defines what full-time enrollment is. So you need to be a full-time student. And if you ever need to take a break, to take a semester off, that's something you need to talk with your school advisors about, because that it usually means that they need to take an action on your record so that you don't lose your visa status. So those are all just general requirements for your visa status. I do want to mention that right now, this is a challenging time all over the world because of coronavirus, the COVID-19. It's had a very big impact on travel. And there are currently many restrictions for traveling and even for visa appointments. So every country may have its own restrictions, and the US itself has its own restrictions. There were several presidential proclamations. These were proclamations made by President Trump that relate to restricting travel to the US. For instance, for people traveling through the Schengen zone. That means that for many of you, you'll need, if you were to receive your visa, you would need to have special approval to be able to travel through Schengen countries. So that's just an added step. It's more for the embassy to figure out, but it's something that will likely be mentioned during your visa interview. The other thing to keep in mind, I can speak, for example, for in Georgia, because of the rising cases of COVID in the country of Georgia, we've had to severely reduce our number of visa appointments at this time. And currently the only visa appointments, and this is very recent as of this past week, we're at this exact moment, we're only doing emergency appointments and what we would call critical to the embassy visa appointments. So under normal circumstances, we would say just make a visa appointment and you should be able to come in and you could start your program in January. I think, to be realistic, right now it's going to be hard for some of you potentially to start a program in January because of some of these restrictions. So keep that in mind. I don't know where people are in the process of studying in the US, if you've already applied, been accepted. But for some of you, I think you need to set realistic expectations that a January start date is not impossible, but it will be difficult because of these restrictions in place because of COVID. And so with that, I know that people have a lot of questions. I was told to keep my remarks brief and allow most of the time for questions. So if it's all right with you, I'll stop there and let people ask questions that they have.
Okay, Matt, I think there are a couple questions for you in Q&A, but there is also one question in chat. And the question in chat is, can financial award letter be a confirmation of my financial status for visa?
Okay, good question. So when it comes to financial documents, what we are generally looking for, the best documents are, first of all, if you have something from the school, if you're receiving a scholarship, a fellowship, something from the school, that's a very good letter. It's very clear to us that that is a legitimate document. The other thing that we like to look for are bank statements. And we understand that for many students, they are still young, maybe have not worked. So the bank statement is coming from family. So that's helpful. We understand it's okay. You don't need to bring your personal bank statement, but you can bring something from parents or sponsor. So those are better documents than, for instance, a loan. Loans are not we understand that people pay for studies differently, but a bank statement is better than a loan. If you are trying to put together documents that are going to be easier to confirm that you have the support necessary to be successful during your studies in the US. So that would be my recommendation. Let me see, I had another thought, but let me check the Q&A again.
And there are a few more questions, Matt. I'm going to read them to you.
Okay.
Are you allowed to intern as an F1 visa student in the USA?
So can you be an intern on an F1 student visa? Yes, it is possible. It usually happens under a program called Curricular Practical Training, or CPT. That's program of study requires you to get practical experience. You see this a lot in engineering programs. A lot of programs have this, where during the summer or during one of the semesters, they help you find a business to work with to get some practical training. Sometimes it's called an internship. Sometimes it's called a co-op, cooperative. Sometimes they just call it practical training. Mm-hmm. There are many different names. You should expect that this will not happen your first year. This usually happens later in your degree program, at least after the first year. And for those instances, you need to check with your student advisors. You need to receive prior approval before you start working. In all cases, when it comes to working, you want to check and make sure that you got the necessary approval before you start working.
Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to prompt our attendees today that there will be a separate session on OPT and CPT's practical training opportunities in the US. And please look for that webinar in the webcast agenda and attend those if you also need any further information on those. So the next question is, can financial award letter be a confirmation or proof of my financial status for a visa?
Okay, so I think we talked about this a little bit. And so without seeing the document exactly that the person's referring to, it's hard for me to say for sure. But as I said, if you have the document from the school showing that you've got support, if you have proof in the form of bank statements, then that should be sufficient. And I want you to keep in mind that before you come to the interview, before you come for your visa appointment, the school will have already asked you for these documents, for proof of financial support. How are you going to pay for your studies? Because they need that information to create the I-20 document that you use to apply for the visa and to enter the US. So the school will have already asked you for these documents. You just need to then bring them to the visa interview with you so that we can also take a look at them.
Thank you. So another student is asking that I have already an F1 visa because I studied in the US before for 1 year in high school. Will I need to apply again for a visa to study in a different institution, like a college? And his visa is expiring in 2024, the one that he already has.
That is a good question. And I want to give you a direct answer, but I'll say this. The officials at the border, who are our CBP, Customs and Border Protection officials, generally what they're looking for is a visa. A valid visa that's not expired. If you look at the visa that you currently have, it probably has the school name that you attended previously. It probably had the CVIS ID, CVIS number, starts with an N00. It probably has that number on that visa. And so we have heard of instances where students had difficulty entering the US when their visa showed a different school and maybe with a different CVIS number. And so the safest and most cautious option is to reapply for the visa based on the new school that you have, especially if there was a gap between your studies. We understand that sometimes students transfer from one school to another. When there's a transfer, you usually don't need to apply for a new visa because the CVIS ID or that CVIS number gets transferred as well. But when you have a gap and your CVIS number changes, we do recommend that you get a new visa.
Wonderful. That's a very good advice. So are embassies do embassies accept printed letters from the school, or all documents must be directly emailed to the embassy, in the case consulate, I believe?
We don't expect schools to email us anything directly, only in maybe rare circumstances where we are trying to clarify something with the school itself, will we have them email us directly. So we anticipate and expect that you will be bringing with you, for instance, an admission letter that you received from the school that you printed out, or a financial award letter that the school sent you that you printed out. The I-20 document that I've mentioned, that should be the original. You really should be bringing the original I-20 with you. It shouldn't be a copy. We should be looking at the original document.
So I'll combine two questions now. As a financial sponsor, who can be the one? Can it not be a part of the family? And also, what are maybe some very common things that might prevent students to get a visa?
That's a good question. So it does not have to be an immediate family member. It could be a family friend. It could be a more distant relative. But during the interview, one of the things that we are trying to confirm, and one of the things that we look at, is this relationship. Does it make sense that this person is going to support this student? And so when it's apparent, when we know that it's the mother or the father who's supporting the student, that is easy for us to understand. It makes sense. When it is your neighbor, then we start to have questions. Why would this neighbor? You're going to need to do maybe more explaining, or you're going to need to understand that relationship a little bit better as to why your family is not supporting you, but your neighbor is. And what's your relationship with that neighbor? Why are they willing to support you in this way? It's not impossible, but it raises a little bit more questions. And that leads me to another point I want to make, is that when you receive admission and you get the I-20, that does not automatically mean that you will receive the visa. There are some other circumstances that we look at when we are interviewing you. So in many cases, the student visa interviews go very well and people are very happy with the outcome. But sometimes we unfortunately don't have good news and we do have to refuse the applicants. We don't like to do that, but because of the visa laws, they're very strict. And unfortunately, that means that sometimes we do need to refuse an applicant. I can't get into all of the various ways because it's complicated, and we're looking at the total, all of the different factors, and we're weighing that to see if it meets the threshold for approving the visa.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So there is there are a set of the questions. So this one probably will be a shorter answer. Hello, I'll be 17 years old while applying for my F1 visa, I believe, for the college. Is it a problem? And then another one will be, while you have already addressed on F1 visa CPTs, like curriculum-based training, can you get a part-time job with an F1 visa as a student?
Yeah, good question. So your age it does not play a major factor in getting a visa. The only added factor is maybe when you are underage, you might need a parent to also sign off. Usually somebody over the age of 18 is the one signing the I-20 in addition to the 17-year-old. But no, that's fine. I wasn't an international student, but I started college when I was 17. It's not that uncommon, you know. If you were 15 and starting college, then maybe you're a genius, and so congratulations. But we would talk about that and see if there were any other concerns that we had. But no, 17, that's not a problem. And then related to part-time work, when you want to work, as I've mentioned before, you are limited in what you can and what you cannot do. Essentially, if you want to work while you are studying, you're going to be restricted to on-campus employment. Part-time, it usually means 20 hours a week or less of on-campus employment. So that would be working in the library, working in the cafeteria. I mentioned McDonald's earlier. If there's a McDonald's at your school, on the school's campus, you can work there because it's considered on campus. So, but again, those are things that you still are going to want to make sure that you have the authorization, the work permit before you start working there. And most schools and colleges have something in place to make sure that that everybody gets approval.
Wonderful. There is another coming questions. If you get refused on visa, how much time it will take to apply for the second time?
So there is no specific time requirement. There's nothing in the law that says you have to wait a certain period of time. My recommendation is if you are refused a visa, I would not apply again until the situation is different, or unless you have new information, new documentation, something that makes the next interview or the next appointment different. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I see students applying 1 week, they're refused, and they apply the next week, and the situation is exactly the same, and they're just wasting money. So sometimes that means waiting until the next semester. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that means waiting until you've got, maybe something was missing. You didn't bring financial documents, or you later received a scholarship. That's new information. You can apply again. But generally, you need to wait until the situation is different or some time has passed.
Some of the common questions normally among the students is also like, one thing is to understand what general documents you will bring to the interview, but are there any tips, how to handle the visa interview itself? Maybe, some questions that will be commonly asked during the interviews.
Yeah, good. That's a good question. So in general, you should expect that the interview will be done in English. Unless you're going to study English, like an English as a second language kind of a program, we expect that you have sufficient level of English to do an interview, a visa interview, because if you can't do a visa interview in English, we have doubts that you will be successful as a student in the US. Because when you're a student in the US, you will be writing in English, you will be presenting in English, you'll be reading. So there needs to be a certain proficiency of English. So first of all, be prepared for English to be the language during your interview. Secondly, you should be ready to answer where you're going, what will you be studying, why did you choose that school, why did you decide to study in the US and not in your home country? What was your reasoning or purpose? How will you support yourself financially? So those are a lot of the basic questions. If you're going for a higher education, master's, PhD, we'll probably ask you questions about your bachelor's degree and why you're choosing to study in the US. We may ask about your family. Has anybody else studied in the US, traveled to the US? What do your parents do, especially if the parents are supporting you? We're going to want to know what the parents do. And so those are the key questions that we generally like to ask. So we may not ask all of those, or we may ask additional ones, but you should be prepared to respond to all of those.
Thank you very much. Also, there was a question about, can you give us an examples where, it was clearly, that the applicant was refused their visa. And I think partially you just covered that too. If your English is weak and you cannot represent, yourself, that could be one of the, cases, right?
Exactly. So we have serious doubts. But we do want to make sure that people will be successful as well in the US. And so if we detect that that somebody may not be successful, that maybe something got missed by the school in terms of the English proficiency, then yeah, that would be reasons for us to refuse a visa. And I'm trying to think of something else. If the purpose if the reasoning for going to the US doesn't make sense, if the financial documents that are presented are not sufficient, if the parents are going to support the student but they're not working, or something like that, there's a number of things that are concerns for us. Those are usually why a visa gets refused. It's because the vice consul has concerns about the student success, ability to be successful in the US in this degree program, or that maybe something related to the admission or the financial documents was a little bit off.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So I think we'll be wrapping it up. Maybe one and final question. If I have a green card, can I study in the US? And if I will, how I will be considered? Will I be an international or American student?
That is a very good question, and it probably will depend on the university, how they decide to code you in the system. You would not need an F1 visa. You would not need to come to the US Embassy. That much would be clear, because you wouldn't need that to enter the US. You would be entering using your green card. So from our perspective, you would not be an international student. You would be a resident. So I think most colleges, most universities would label you as some schools or colleges may have a separate category for LPRs or permanent residents that would be separate from the international student category, but it's a case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And so one short answer, I believe, what is the fee for getting a student visa? And then finally, maybe if you can, refer students to a site, official site, where they can find more information on what documentations to secure, how to travel on the F1 visa and things like that. You can either, say the reference to the site, or, maybe just post a link in the chat. And that will probably wrap up our session.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I do apologize. I don't have the exact dollar amounts right in front of me, and I don't want to give you the wrong information. But when you do apply for a student visa, you do need to be aware that there are kind of two fees associated with being a student in the U.S. One of them is the visa fee. There's a fee for applying for the visa, getting the interview, and then the second fee is for this. What I've mentioned it a couple times, SEVIS or SEVIS. There's a fee. It's basically a fee for your student record to be in this information system. You're paying for the maintenance of that record, and the I-20 document gets created from this database. So a lot of students get confused because they paid one of those fees, and they think that it covered the other fee. So they think they've paid for the visa fee, but they've only paid for the SEVIS fee. Mm-hmm. So there will be two fees that you will need to pay. So, and I don't have the exact number right in front of me. I know that people are watching this from several different countries. Each of your country's embassy, U.S. embassy or consulate, should have information on their website in English and the local language about what you need to bring with you, how do you apply. And so I would check out your local embassy's website for F1 student visas, and it should be pretty clear.
And also another question about restrictions for traveling while Corona. I believe they will also find the country-specific information on the websites, on the embassy websites, if they check it. Well, that was the final remark, I guess. I think we have answered most of the questions. Some of them were similar, common questions, but thank you very much, Matt. There has been a wonderful session, very informative, very open. There are so many myths about, applying for the student visa and getting it. And today we just had an access directly to Vice Consul at the Consulate of Georgia, and all of you got the straightforward answers that will help you prepare for your next destination, study in the US with your F1 visa. Thank you. And I'll hand over now the session to Elena to moderate, and then welcome the next panel of speakers, for which my colleague will take the lead. Thank you. Have a good day.